I'll start by saying thank you. Thank you for being here today. Want to welcome you to Club E. My name is Rick Brimacombe of Brimacombe and Associates. I am your architect of business growth, and I'll work with you to unlock the potential and amplify the scale of your company. Today, we're going to be talking about, as a business owner, what will be your legacy? I want to thank our sponsors. Irish Titan is an e-commerce and web development firm. Boulay Group, CPA and Advisors. Highland Bank, a locally owned community bank. Romaine Berg, a digital marketing agency. Minnesota Sales, a sales acceleration firm. And the Network Connect, a catalytic gateway for growing your company. Before we get going, I'd like you to subscribe and like our Club E channel. We need your help, so please take a moment. We'll wait before we get going. Click on the subscribe button. It's down by the video, as well as the like button. That will allow us to deliver better content to you, our wonderful audience, as well as to let you know when our sessions are going live. Okay, again, thank you everybody for joining us. And with that, let me turn it over to Sue Crockett of the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership to introduce herself, her organization, and our panelists today. Sue.
Great. Thank you, Rick. And we're happy to join Club E today, and a warm welcome to the audience. You know, I know we're all inundated with Zoom calls and virtual meetings and webinars, and it's getting really old. So I appreciate that you're taking the time to view one more. I'm Sue Crockett, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership. And we are a nonprofit, and we serve as a hub for unbiased information, resources, and education on all forms of employee ownership. Over the next 10 years, more than 2.4 U.S. businesses owned by retiring baby boomers will change hands or dissolve. And unfortunately, studies show that more than half of all small business owners do not have a succession plan. And even if a business does have a succession plan, many Minnesota businesses will be sold and leave the state or close their doors permanently, resulting in job loss, tax base, and community commitment. All because owners may not be familiar with employee ownership as a transition model. So if you're joining us today as a business owner who's just curious about the options in transitioning your business, or as a professional that is guiding your clients in those decisions, I know you're going to be enlightened by today's stories. One from an ESOP company, Employee Stock Ownership Plan, and another from a worker cooperative, and the professionals that help them with this transition. And please feel free to reach out to mnceo.org for more information, for resources, for experts, to have companies that are employee owned, you know, to check in with them, or even just to go to a deeper level to find out more about employee ownership. So with that, again, thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves. And maybe, Ben, would you like to begin?
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm Benjamin Tsai. I work with Nexus Community Partners. We are a nonprofit intermediary based in the Twin Cities. And our mission is to create broad access to community wealth building opportunities. And we provide succession planning services for the growing number of retiring business owners and those looking to exit. We specialize in helping businesses transition into employee ownership and worker cooperative formats. And I came to this work by actually co-founding my own worker cooperative. It's called the Hub Bike Co-op and has a chain of shops in Minneapolis. And so kind of using that as a springboard, I learned how to run a business at scale and helped consult for other cooperatives around the country, and then joined up with Nexus last year to help with their work in this area. So I've been in the worker cooperative and employee ownership space for about 17 years now. And I will pass it along to Tom.
Sure, that sounds good. My name is Tom Crouse. Hello, everyone. I am wearing a mask because I am in the Happy Earth cleaning offices today getting some work done. I am the sales manager over here at Happy Earth Cleaning, and also one of the founding member owners, one of 5 employees that just this January transitioned Happy Earth Cleaning LLC into Happy Earth Cleaning Co-op. So there are 5 of us now making the decisions over here and running the business. My background is mostly in publishing, editing, and writing. I came through sales mostly as a copywriter, and so I've written for different organizations like City Pages and places like that, and really found myself in sales for a few years. And now that I've had the experience of transitioning Happy Earth Cleaning into a co-op, I'm really driven to help other organizations do the same however I can. And so that's why I've joined up with MN CEO, and I will be applying my expertise as a writer and someone who has on the ground transitioned a business into a co-op to help MN CEO make other businesses do the same. And maybe we'll go next to Bruce.
Thanks, Tom and Rick and Sue. I'm Bruce Christensen. I'm the CEO of the Christensen Group Insurance Agency. We're an employee-owned, a 100% employee-owned firm that happens to be in the insurance brokerage space. Aside from our national broker peers, we're the largest independent insurance agency in Minnesota. We employ about 160 people today. We're a top 100 firm in the country, which we'll talk, I guess, in the future parts of this discussion about recruiting. And then I've been in the insurance business since 1979 and ran my business until 2006 when we converted to employee ownership. So I've had some interesting experience. It's been a great journey, and look forward to hearing these other stories as well. So thanks so much. And Dan.
Yep. Hello, everybody. My name's Dan Markowitz. I'm a partner at Boulay over in Eden Prairie. We are a regional CPA firm who has a specialty in ESOP. So I'm the ESOP practice lead. We work with about 110 ESOPs on an annual basis, anywhere from ESOP feasibility on the front side of the transaction to transaction consulting. We have a third-party administration firm to develop the participant statements for ESOP plans, as well as we do a ton of M&A, sustainability, consulting, and repurchase obligation studies for ESOP-owned companies. And then Boulay is a traditional CPA firm, so we do a lot of corporate audit and tax work for ESOP-owned companies as well.
Well, thank you, everyone. This is quite an excellent panel, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing from all of them. And so before I turn it back over to Rick, I want to remind you about sending in your questions. We'd really like to keep this an open dialogue and help you learn as much as you possibly can about ESOPs and worker cooperatives. So again, thank you for joining, and Rick, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Sue. So yeah, as Sue mentioned, go into the Q&A field to submit your questions. In the comments field, you can see everybody's email addresses, and we got a little question out there, curious where you all are tuning in from. Also, just so you know, Dan Markowitz and I did a all you need to know about ESOPs a couple of weeks back on a Club E session. You can find that on the YouTube channel. And when we send a follow-on email to our participants with contact info and other information about our event today, we will provide a pointer to that as well. Before we get going, we do have a giveaway. If with your question you do #legacy, you can put your name into a drawing to receive a 1.5-hour consultation with Dan Markowitz of Boulay. So again, it is #legacy with your question, and you get in, put in for the drawing. Okay, so we're going to start with a couple of individual questions. I'm going to ask all the panelists an individual question. Then we'll do some group questions, and kind of intermingling with that, I will get to some of our audience questions as well. So our first question, we're going to start in the co-op space for you, Benjamin. tell everybody in the audience what actually a cooperative is and how decisions are typically made, because I think that would be something that folks would really like to know.
Yeah. So worker cooperatives, they're a form of business that are owned and controlled by the employees. But more broadly, cooperatives are a business that are owned and controlled by its users. So there are a lot of different kinds, and the worker cooperative is one. You might be more familiar with credit unions and consumer co-ops. So like REI, or one of the many grocery co-ops you might know about around the Twin Cities. In addition, well-known and running at a large scale are the agricultural co-ops, which are really prominent here in Minnesota. There's electrical, and CHS happens to be a Fortune 500 level cooperative. So there's quite a broad diversity in the cooperative space. That said, we do specialize in worker co-ops, where the employees basically participate in, they get a vote, one member, one vote, helping make decisions both for the board of directors and other important matters. And they get profit sharing. And basically, I think the main difference with for example, the worker co-op from the consumer co-op is that, like a consumer co-op, the user is a shopper. They use the co-op to purchase goods, get services, and get the pricing they want. With the worker co-op, the use is to get a job, a high quality job, and to get profit sharing and a control over your working conditions. As far as how decisions are made in a worker co-op, I like to kind of break the decision making into two separate levels. So you have sort of your daily operations, which in a worker co-op, it's run pretty much standard vertical management structure. But then in the governance side of things, the long-term strategic planning and policy work, that is done by a board of directors, which is elected by the employees. So hopefully that gives you the quick summary of how they work.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much. Tom, let's jump over to you. Tell us a little bit about which businesses can become a co-op, and is becoming co-op more work than just selling your business?
Yes, this is a great question, because, as Benjamin talked about, there are a lot of different types of businesses that can become a co-op, and even a lot of different types of co-ops that you can become. But specifically talking about employee ownership, I think any business with an engaged group of employees is a strong candidate to become a co-op. And the reason for that is because it is a little bit more work than just selling your business, and it will be a little bit more work for everyone who's involved in helping with the transition or in establishing a new co-op. But what I found in going through that process for Happy Earth is it was the kind of work that we needed to do as a small business anyway. So it was setting up clear channels of communication amongst all the member owners and management and the employees, and having a clear decision matrix of who makes what decisions at what levels, and really being open about all this stuff and discussing, who makes the hard decisions in bad times, really prepared us to be very adaptable. Say when the pandemic hit, for example, we're still alive, we're still thriving. I attribute that to the quick, responsible and adaptive nature that all of the employee owners were able to come to together. And it was because we had put in that little bit of extra work in establishing our channels of communication and decision making that we were ready to move as soon as something started going wrong. We were ready to change. We launched a new product line in a week and a half because we were ready to go. And so just based on the past at Happy Earth, when we were just owned by a couple of individuals, decisions that we come to now are much more carefully thought out, and we come to them much faster. And so the extra work that we did to get there, I think, was worth it, and has resulted in essentially a better goodwill for our business overall.
Great, that makes sense. Reminder for everybody, Q&A opportunity for you to ask questions as well as to get your name in a drawing, #legacy, spend a half hour with Dan Markowitz of Boulay. And then I see that Roger is joining us from Brunswick, Maine. So far, Roger wins the big prize of being the furthest one from where we're located in the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Twin Cities area. So thanks for joining us, Roger. So Dan, let's switch to ESOPs and go over to you. Talk about what types of companies and with what kinds of characteristics make for a good ESOP candidate. But then also, how does the ESOP transaction actually work? And then there's a number of different players and advisors who are involved. So maybe touch on that as well. So three parts.
Okay. So what type of companies work? I think companies that have strong cash flow, probably low leverage before the transaction, steady earnings. So startup companies where earnings are bouncing off all over the place, or low or negative cash flow, become really difficult because most ESOP valuations are really based on a 5-year discounted cash flow analysis. So if you think about how that works, post ESOP, if earnings are bouncing all over the place, the stock price will be bouncing all over the place. And that's probably not the best thing from a communication standpoint from a participant perspective. We typically see a minimum of $750 to $1 million of EBITDA. So probably a little higher than the Worker Cooperative in some cases, but that's kind of the baseline that we look at for what makes sense from an ESOP. On the transaction side, Rick is right. There is a number of players. So at a high level, the ESOPs are a retirement plan. It's an ESOP trust that's regulated by the Department of Labor and the IRS. So in the transaction, an ESOP trustee will be selected who will be negotiating on behalf of the participants. The ESOP trustee will have an attorney, an ERISA attorney, as well as a financial advisor valuation firm. And that's really the trustee team that is negotiating with the selling shareholders. On the selling shareholder side, there will likely be another ERISA attorney, as well as a financial advisor / CPA firm who's helping guiding that business owner through the transaction. From a corporate structure standpoint, post-transaction, a board of directors is appointed. Typically, closely held businesses, family-owned businesses may not have a formal board prior to a transaction, or it may be 1 or 2 individuals. We're not saying that the selling shareholders can't be on the board. Typically they are, but usually post-transaction, there's a 1 or 2 independent directors outside of the organization. It could be a friendly independent director, but really what the DOL wants to look at if you go 100% transaction is that the selling shareholders have given up control. And one way they look at it is who controls the board post-transaction.
Okay, thank you very much. Bruce, jumping over to you. When you decided to sell the business, you decided to sell the employees. So you went through this transition to an ESOP rather than a financial buyer. Why did you do that?
Well, we spent about 2 years exploring liquidity options, mainly for a couple of older partners. I was the majority shareholder, but I had a couple of minority partners that had expressed interest in liquidity event. And so over a 2-year period, we looked at a few different alternatives, strategic acquirers, which are the fashionable alternative right now in our industry, as well as an internal succession plan with some of our key staff. But after that 2-year exercise, and meeting with organizations like the National Center for Employee Ownership does a good job of exposing business owners to the structure and the professionals that support it. We made the decision that this was in our best interest to keep an opportunity, another 20 or 30-year opportunity for our employees, and maintain that independence that was important to us. I was in my late 40s, and as a majority owner, wasn't really interested in in exiting my role as the CEO of the company, or actually giving up too much of the control issues that Dan talked about. And so an ESOP is a really intriguing alternative from that perspective, because sellers do maintain control and at least some form of control, along with sharing it with the next generation of ownership. And so we launched a 100% ESOP transaction in 2006. And it's been a life changer for many of our employees in terms of their quality of life and building net worth. And it's worked out very well for me as a selling principal. And oddly enough, all the selling shareholders are still engaged to some extent in the business 15, 16 years later, which is virtually unheard of in private company transactions.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that insight. I know it also has allowed you and your firm to stay active in the local community, as I know you have over the years. So thanks for continuing to do that. All right, let's jump back to co-ops. Another question for Benjamin. Talk a little bit about the typical timeline for that transition and what's involved with transitioning to a co-op.
Yeah, so as you know, I mean, succession planning is best done years in advance. That said, we can be flexible and adapt to, people's situation. So, a worker cooperative conversion is a little bit simpler and more affordable than an ESOP. So you can actually get it done in as little as 9 months if everything's really kind of just a perfect fit. Typically, though, we operate on about a 1.5 year kind of timeline, just to make sure that the process is really smooth and everyone knows what's going on. And as far as what's in that timeline, we provide a full package of services to facilitate these transitions. So we do just on the front end, just basic education, answer questions, kind of get a general idea if there's a fit. We move into feasibility studies, where we help provide guidance on potential sale prices, employee fit, whether it really aligns in the long term with the finances and goals of the business and the employees who might be buying it. And then we do help structure the deal too. We bring in co-op experts, CPAs, lawyers, etc., to help structure the deal, make sure it's airtight. And we can also help pull in financing with our CDFI partners. It's very competitive financing that can be available to help make these transactions move. And once the sale is complete, we even offer post-transition services. So we can help consult with the new business, providing financial and governance support. And that whole package, because there is a lot of training and education involved with multiple stakeholders, that's what we like to take our time if possible. But again, it can be shifted around as needed. So that's pretty much the summary of our kind of service offering.
Okay, great. Thank you. So staying on the co-op front, Tom, let's jump to you. What struggles did you face in transforming Happy Earth Cleaning into a co-op, and what kind of resources were the most helpful in that transition?
Yeah, I'd say our biggest struggle going into the transition was really just like a lack of information, or even a real understanding of where to find it, of how do we take this existing business and, change the structure from underneath it without actually making too many changes to the business or the service that we provide for our customers. And in the beginning, we had no idea how to do that. So it was a matter of doing some research, attending classes, reaching out to some consultants that have done this type of thing before and can help you. We absolutely would not have been able to achieve our transition without the help that we received from different organizations in the community. So just for example, if you are a business thinking about, even considering transitioning into a co-op, reaching out to Nexus if you're in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota is a great place to start. Project Equity is another organization that's a national organization. And these are people that, even the initial consultation with them, it can be free, and they can just help you make that initial decision of like, what's feasible, what could this look like for my business? Just to give one example, as we were going into the Happy Earth transition, we knew the business was valuated at around $250K. And we had about 5 employees, 5 of our 19 employees who were interested in becoming the first round of employee owners. And we were thinking at first, oh boy, 5 employees, $250,000. Are we each going to have to like come up with $50K in order to buy this business and make it a co-op? And the answer is no. The co-op is its own entity which takes on any loan or financing liabilities that might be a part of the transition, and then the employees can buy into that at whatever level we set. So the financial liability for each of the employee owners was much, much, much lower than we were originally thinking it might be, and that obviously made it a lot easier, a lot more enticing for more employees to explore ownership.
Okay, great. So jumping now to back to the ESOPs, we have had a couple of questions come in, so appreciate everybody doing that. And so thank you for that. Again, reminder, #legacy to put your name into a drawing to get a half hour of time with Dan Markowitz. Dan, one of the questions that has come in from the audience, and then I'll get to back to the script. What do you think is the biggest myth and or misperception that exists when selling a company to an ESOP?
Yeah, there's a couple myths. So first, do the employees of the company now control the company? And the answer is no. So the ESOP trust has a trustee who's really responsible for looking out for the best interests of the participants. The employees of the company have a beneficial interest in that trust. You still have a board of directors that controls the strategic direction of the company, and the information is shared at the board. The employees are not required to see financials. Some ESOPs have gone to open book management, where they share a lot more detail, but really all the participants are really required to see is their annual ESOP participant statement, which shows the stock price. The board of directors still runs the strategic direction of the company, and the management team still runs the day-to-day operations of the company. So the participants just have that beneficial interest in the trust and are not truly shareholders, because the shareholder is the ESOP trust.
Okay. And then when you first hear from business owners and CEOs who are considering doing an ESOP, what are they generally kind of thinking and feeling at that moment? And what are they like when they first reach out to you?
Yeah, so a lot of times they may have already gone down the road of looking at a financial buyer, a private equity firm, a strategic buyer, or they have friends who've sold to those individuals and see what the aftermath looks like 2 or 3 years down the road. And really, that's not what they want for their employees. So typically they are looking for a transition of creating the legacy continuity of their business, especially in greater Minnesota, keeping that business in greater Minnesota. Even in the cities, keeping the employees. A lot of them are long-term employees, and they just don't want to turn them over to a private equity group. There's a lot of education that has to go on about ESOPs. I know there's a question about what's the myth and misconceptions, and it's the regulation of the DOL and how that impacts the transaction. As long as you have a trustee who negotiates on behalf of the participants and doesn't pay more than fair market value for the company, then there's no issue. The problem is in the papers, you get to see the bad transactions where more than fair market value was paid. The other thing is the owners are doing it for the right reason. So while they're entitled to a fair return on their investment, likely they're not looking for the highest multiple. They're really doing it for the right reasons, for the culture of the company, for the employees. They get a fair price in the transaction. There's no doubt about that, but they're really doing it for the right reasons.
Okay. Thanks for that. Say, Bruce, let's jump over to you for a second. A question from the audience. Neil, appreciate your participation, Neil. Neil asked, did the shareholders' compensation change in connection with the sale to the ESOP? And if so, how? Obviously, you don't have to get too far into the weeds, but maybe at a high level, talk a little bit about the compensation changes, if at all.
Really, there were no changes to compensation because we had run a very business-like profit and loss statement. Obviously, we turn off any distribution of profits, the K-1 that they were receiving, that track that income no longer existed, so there's no support for the tax component of that. So to the extent that the ownership component of compensation went away, of course, but the basic services value of their jobs in our situation didn't change because it was structured to fair market already.
Okay.
And I would just add there, Bruce, it's probably commensurate of what the person is doing in that position. So if you have a CEO who's sold but stays on but is only working 2 days a week, well, then their compensation would be adjusted. If they're still the CEO going forward, they'll get a fair market value for a CEO, but the profit component of it would be removed. Yep.
Right.
Okay. So Bruce, let's stay with you for a moment here. When you looked at doing an ESOP, what did you see as the competitive advantages to doing that? And then how did you finance the transaction?
Well, let me take the first part or the last part first. The financing of the transaction at the time, bear in mind this is 2006, so it's pre-recession. The banks were still pretty aggressively supporting leverage transactions. And we had a friendly lender in our space that was owned by an insurance company that partnered with a local bank and took 60% of the transaction value. 40% then was seller financed. And so the four partners on a pro rata basis lent the balance of the money. And, to address Tom's earlier comment about employees having to go and leverage their personal financial statements, that doesn't exist in an ESOP either. The company itself, no employee took on debt to make that transaction work. It was strictly bank debt and the seller financing that financed the entire transaction. In terms of the competitive advantages, I think we were looking at the time, we were looking at what were our alternatives for liquidity events and which one lined up best with our long-term vision. And, clearly the ESOP structure has been a tremendous recruiting, retention, and employee motivation tool. And in our business, we're a service organization, so our assets drive home at night. And to be able to have something that is so well aligned to their interests, our clients' interests, and our carrier and insurance company partners' interest has been extraordinary. So when we did the transaction, we had about 50 employees. We've grown to about 160 employees. And so it's worked out very, very well from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Say, we heard a little bit from Bruce about financing the transaction. Anybody else on the panel? Because we had a question come in from Roger. Where does the money come from to buy the business? So we got Bruce's answer. Anybody else care to answer that question?
I can answer that in the case of Happy Earth. So for our transition, we were told we had some flexibility in how exactly we were going to finance it, how big of a loan we need to get, how much the ex-owners might want to finance over a period of years. And we wound up structuring it as a $150,000 loan from shared capital, which I believe is a 10-year term. I'm not exactly sure on that. Our general manager handles a lot of the numbers. And so we pay that back with profits from the co-op over a period of time. And then the remaining 100,000 of the value of the business is being financed on some flexible terms to the owners over a period of 5 years. So they gave us some flexibility with that last 100K that was not covered by the 150K loan that we got from our lender, Shared Capital. So similar, it's like they basically provided us a bank loan. They're not really a bank, but they are a lender. And then some flexible financing from the ex-owners also. It was a mix. And we had some flexibility to structure it how it worked best for us.
Yeah, and I just say that is a pretty classic scenario with worker co-op transitions too.
In the ESOP world, it might be a little different. So you see these days, probably up to 25%, 30% of the transaction be financed by an outside bank, and then the rest is taken on by the seller. We do see a lot of 100% seller transactions. There's some advantages, and we're not going to get too deep into the technical, but there are some advantages for the seller to do that. The other thing too, and I know we'll probably touch on this, but if you go 100% in S Corp ESOP status, you become the income passes out to the ESOP Trust, and the ESOP Trust is a federal exempt entity. So the company no longer has to make distributions for federal income taxes or pay federal income taxes. And what that does is you're allowed to reinvest that 40% tax savings to pay down that transactional debt. So typically we see transactional debt get paid down relatively quickly in an ESOP transaction because of that tax savings. And I know we'll spend some more time on that here in a little bit, but that's a really nice benefit of ESOPs.
Sure. And we've been getting a number of questions, so thank you everybody for your participation. Reminder, #legacy if you'd like to get in a drawing for a half hour of Dan's time. So to the full panel, because I think this is a good way to get people started in their thinking and their journey towards either an ESOP or a co-op, but what are the first steps that you think a company and or business owner should do as they transition to the ESOP or co-op?
I can jump in here. These transactions, at least on the ESOP world, and Dan spoke to it, they don't make a poorly operating company good, and it doesn't, and putting debt on a good company doesn't, disable it. So, financial confidence and fiscal discipline are sort of the foundations of an ESOP transaction. It's got to be feasible. And so, this really gets back to the professional side, the Boulets of the world. Those are the starting points of getting a feasibility. Does this make sense given this particular desire on the part of a seller? Because it is a complex transaction, and you want to know that the business is durable to deleverage that debt that's going to get taken on, whether it's bank debt or seller debt. It's got to be feasible. And so that it really starts with a conversation with your advisors.
I'll jump in there real quick. That we start with an ESOP feasibility, but to Bruce's point, an ESOP is an ownership structure. It's not. So if the business has business succession issues with either people or industry, those issues are still going to be prevalent post-transaction. So I remind people that it is an ownership structure, so it doesn't magically solve any business succession issues. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on the front side is if the owner is going to exit, is there a second team in place, management team in place that can run the business post-transaction? While that selling shareholder may sign an employment agreement for 18 months to 36 months post-transaction to help assure that it would be an orderly transition, if the selling shareholder is going to exit the business, is there a second management team in place to really run that business post-transaction?
Yeah, and I mean, I was just going to add, in addition to the feasibility study from a financial perspective, similar to what Dan was saying, I mean, we look at the different governance options that can be, you know, the best fit for moving forward. And there's a lot of flexibility there, you know, and a lot of options. So that's definitely a part of our feasibility study process, is sort of developing like straw models and yeah, just sort of working through the different options to see how to optimize it all.
Okay. So what kind of considerations did a business owner make prior to offering employees ownership? And what does it really mean in terms of putting more responsibility on the employees?
So I'll start and then let Bruce jump in. It starts, one is with the ESOP plan design, so how shares get allocated to participants, how long the shares will be allocated to participants. So not all the shares are allocated on day one. These days they're allocated over a 20 to 40 year period. So there's not a crunch on the company from a repurchase obligation standpoint. Really trying to hone in on a certain benefit level, probably between 5 and 10% annually. We do have mature ESOPs that get up to the 20 to 25% level. But the service community has learned a lot over the years about allocating those shares over a longer period of time, so you don't end up with a large repurchase obligation 15 or 20 years after the transaction. But ESOP plan design is the number one thing. Understanding how provisions you put in today will affect the plan 10 years down the road. And so we spend a lot of time with clients who decide to go down the ESOP feasibility route and move forward with the transaction on making sure they understand what all the plan provisions mean. Once you've seen one ESOP, you've seen one ESOP. And so there's a lot of flexibility in how the plan is designed. So you got to meet the objectives of the company as well as the plan and the participants.
Yeah, the classic story in the ESOP world locally is LifeTouch. LifeTouch, the school photography business, was one of the largest S corporation, 100% ESOP owned S corporations in the country, 25,000 plan participants. To Dan's point about the plan design, at the time they sold to Shutterfly, 40% of the shares were held by retirees. And so you really wouldn't make the argument that that was an employee-owned company, but a quasi-public company. And so recognizing that potential, because privately owned companies in an ESOP structure can do very well. We had the same problem where we were concerned that people were hanging on for one more year's share price increase. So several years ago, and it's sort of a lead by example, as I was approaching 60 years old, we put in a mandatory repurchase structure. So starting at age 60, all plan participants have to put their shares back to the company over a 5-year period, so that we didn't have that consolidation of equity. We didn't have retirees hanging on for one more year share price increase that only serves to weaken the company for future generations. And it's really been a life changer or game changer for our organization to get our senior people to do, make tough decisions about retirement, taking some of that economic pressure off that. So the plan design is absolutely critical. It's been a really interesting educational experience for me over the last 15 years, understanding the tool, understanding some of the mistakes we made early on, and really recognizing that today we manage benefit level. The decisions we make today manages benefit level 10, 15 years from now. And it's a complex tool, but a fabulous tool for achieving sort of legacy goals for sellers, and really a life-changing opportunity for employees that join the story. So, I don't know. it's a deep topic, and I don't know how far we want to go with it, but suffice it to say, you need a good advisor on the team.
And I'd say over on the co-op side, as far as considerations that you should make as a business owner before offering ownership to any employees, an important principle of co-ops is open and voluntary membership, which means it will never be required of an employee to buy into the co-op. It's always their right to just remain a regular full-time employee and not have to buy into any of the ownership. And so it's really about, identifying, is there a core group of really engaged and motivated and entrepreneurial employees who might want the opportunity? Because while it does put a little bit more responsibility, to attend some meetings and make some business decisions on the employees who become owners, it's also great opportunities for them to directly, share in the profits from the work that they're putting into it. And so that's really the thing to consider. For Happy Earth, we hire employees, we send them out into the field to clean, and we don't follow them around. We trust them to get their work done. And so even before we were considering becoming a co-op, we hired a very an entrepreneurial, self-driven type of candidate. We had a workforce made up of those types of people. And that's kind of how the co-op made the most sense to us, and I think would make sense for any other business with an engaged core group of employees. It doesn't have to be all employees, but a solid core group.
Okay, how about a couple of technical questions, and then I got a couple of other financial ones coming in from our audience. Again, thank you for your participation. We appreciate it very much. Talk a little bit about advantages and disadvantages of being either a C Corp or an S Corp for the ESOP as well as the co-op.
Yeah, so on the ESOP side, if you go 100% S Corp, so there's only two type of legal entities. It's an S Corp or a C Corp. 100% owned S Corp ESOP basically is exempt from federal income taxes. So if you can think about what you're paying in taxes prior to transaction, you can plow that money back in to pay the acquisition debt off, reinvest in organic growth, reinvest in employees, M&A. You see a lot of ESOP companies doing M&A activity because they are generating such significant cash flow because of the income taxes. We have a question in here about an LLC doing ESOP. Typically, the LLC will convert to S Corp status and then do the ESOP or C Corp status. So the LLC cannot be an entity, but it's easy to do a tax-free reorg with the LLC.
Okay.
On the C Corp side, C Corp ESOPs are usually used when it's not 100% owned entity. They still pay federal income taxes like a C Corp. But what the advantage is if a selling shareholder sells their shares to an ESOP that's a C Corp, they can take advantage of what's called 1042 transaction. And basically all you're doing is deferring the gain on the transaction, rolling your cost basis in the C Corp stock over to qualified US securities. So if this is really an estate play or a long-term play, you roll over your cost basis. The proceeds have to be invested within 1 year of the transaction, and you have to do at least 30%, but you can defer the gain on the whole transaction. The best of both worlds is if you're a C Corp for more than 5 years, you do the C Corp transaction, take advantage of the 1042, and then you flip over to an S Corp the next day or that day. And so then you get both the tax savings. If you are an S Corp and you flip over to a C Corp to take advantage of the 1042, you have to stay a C Corp for 5 years. There's some other technicalities, but really that's the big difference between a C Corp ESOP and an S Corp ESOP. And Bruce, maybe you can talk about the benefits of the S Corp ESOP that you guys have had.
Yeah, to Dan's point about we were distributing 40% of our profit to the shareholders pre-transaction to pay their tax bill, or maybe as much as 50% at times. And So to turn off tax, and we also had been funding 15% of pay into profit sharing plan for 22 years. So as an employee-owned firm, where all the profits and the plan is really owned by all the employees, there's no real need to put 15% over into fidelity funds when it's growing at a faster rate in our company. So between the tax savings and the excess profit sharing contributions, it was a material increase in free cash flow to pay off debt. And it paid off very, very quickly, and has allowed us to grow both from some acquisition and investing in talent. And it's a significant enhancement to the company's free cash flow. One other point to add to Dan's comments about the C Corp seller. In our case, remember, I'm a 49-year-old selling 100% of my interest in the company. I wanted to participate in the plan. And as a C Corp seller, if I had deferred the gain, I could not participate in the plan. So it was in my interest to stay as a taxable event so that I could return into the plan as a plan participant and get the proverbial second bite of the apple, so to speak. And so, but there's legitimate reasons to do either one.
Yeah, my understanding for co-ops is that the C Corp format is the easier one. You get the 1042 rollover, similar. And really what you're doing is you're electing to be taxed under subchapter T of the IRS code, which is sort of specific to co-ops. As far as the S Corp format, my understanding is that you would need to convert into a C Corp in order to form a co-op. I've heard that there's or that's the most common method. I've heard there are some workarounds, but commonly we're working with C Corps.
All right, so we're talking a little bit about taxes, and again, for our audience, it'd be a little easier to manage if you put your questions in the Q&A. I can kind of check them off as we're getting them, so if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. Talk a little bit about the tax ramifications to the selling owner, why it may be beneficial to carry back some paper, and then kind of when does the owner have the opportunity to figure out kind of what the net after taxes is that they're going to receive?
Yeah, so I can take that one in the ESOP world. So the second part of that question, in Boulay's ESOP feasibility studies, one of the things that we look at is the after-tax cash flows to the individual shareholder. While the gross number is important, the after-tax cash flows are really important. Since you're selling stock, most of the transaction will be capital gains, on the sale of the stock. If there are warrants in the transaction, those would be ordinary. The reason people take seller is they use the installment sale method on the sale. So you only pay income tax to the extent you receive principal payments. The interest payments on the seller debt are ordinary. But the principal payments, you only pay tax as you receive principal payments. So that's one reason why owners take the seller financing route, because they get the interest income as well as they get the installment sale. Interest, typically if it's 100% S Corp ESOP, it's partly senior debt, partly mezzanine financing. So it probably commands a higher interest rate than what a traditional bank is. But that could put financial burden on the company from a cash flow perspective. So what we typically see in a 100% finance situation is that the interest rate is maybe 3 to 4%, and then warranted is used to get the return more to the 7 to 9% route. The warrant is not additional purchase price. It's really to compensate the owner for that below market interest rate for the risk they're taking on the debt.
Anyone else want to comment about the tax ramifications and the kind of net after they receive? All right, moving on. A couple of questions have come up, also tied to money. One question from Joe is, bank debts typically are the preferred method, or is 100% seller financing? Dan, I know when we touched base a couple of weeks back on ESOPs, there's kind of a typical range of transaction financing. What does that look like in today's market?
So a couple things. One is when you go to a lender and you're going to use bank debt, making sure that lender understands the ESOP structure and they've been through an ESOP transaction. I know there's some that are on this call that have experienced lenders that don't have experience with ESOPs, and that becomes difficult. So there are plenty of lenders out there that will lend to ESOPs, but they need to understand the structure. But typically we see no more than 25 to 30%. We do see larger leverage deals, but it seems like that sweet spot is the 20 to 30% senior debt, and then the rest is seller. Because of the tax savings, that senior debt is usually paid off in 3.5 years, and then you just reload that senior debt on the additional seller debt. So typically the seller will receive full payment in 7 to 8 years post-transaction is what we typically see. You know, every situation is different, but it's not because banks are unwilling to lend to ESOPs. It's just finding the right partner. And then there are some that just say, you know what, I want to be the lender because I want the interest and I like that program better. And so there are many ESOPs that are 100% finance, but they still have a line of credit with a bank. They still have maybe some equipment debt. It's just they choose that they like that program better than a senior lender. And the only thing I would add is if you do bank debt, that seller debt is almost always subordinated to the senior debt. So the senior debt will always get paid first before the seller does.
And that was our experience as well. Most in our case, we hadn't had meaningful corporate debt in decades. And so the thought of putting full leverage on the business was a little bit concerning. And so senior lenders have loan covenants that are somewhat nasty language. And so we wanted to reduce that exposure as quickly as possible, knowing that seller debt's much more friendly. That group understands the risks of the business and is willing to take a deferral of interest payment should a bad situation like a pandemic occur. So I completely understand and relate to what Dan's comments were, just because we lived it.
For us, oftentimes we can leverage up to 60 or 70% of the deal. That's pre-COVID. Things might be changing, but that said, we're always open to more seller financing. We can do earnouts and other options. So yeah, that's sort of, I'd say, the major difference. But I should clarify, I mean, we do often work through CDFI partners. And so they, again, know sort of about the model and are typically supportive of it. And they can often have better terms and covenants and et cetera through CDFIs than classic business banks, especially related to personal guarantees and stuff. I mean, we can actually finance these without personal guarantees sometimes, which is pretty unheard of with a regular business bank.
And to add to that, Ben, most ESOP transactions are financed with senior debt without personal guarantees, and that's why you see it at the 25-30% level, because there's usually enough fixed assets, AR, working capital to secure that debt. So that's another reason why you see it in that 25 to 30% range, because then you avoid the personal guarantees.
Nice.
So from the different perspectives that you four have, what do you think are the biggest hurdles for a company to consider and execute on when they're making that transition to an ESOP or a co-op?
I think it's obviously you have to, the conditions are the ownership desires to have a succession, a financial transaction. The transaction, the motivation is to have some form of internal succession. That's important to the seller to maintain that equity stake in the employee base, and then making peace with putting a lot of debt on your business. You want to make sure that the cash flows into the future are going to be there to pay off the indebtedness that's created. I think those things have to happen. Those three things have to exist for an ESOP transaction to take place. I don't, Dan, you see more of these transactions than I do, and I'd be interested to see if there's other elements that are driving these things other than those three.
Obviously price, what the fair market value of the shares are, and having that up front through an ESOP feasibility. While we're not doing a full valuation, we are doing valuation methodologies with an indication of value. So making sure everybody's at peace at what the company is worth. Everybody, a lot of times people think their companies are worth more than they actually are. So getting over that hurdle. The other hurdle is the cost of the transaction. And so we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that, but a typical ESOP transaction today will cost between $200,000 and $300,000. There are transactions that get smaller transactions that might get done for a little less, but going into it, I would expect to pay $200,000 to $250,000, $300,000 for a transaction. As we talked about earlier, there's multiple service providers involved, and that's really the protection for the seller that they don't have any DOL issues post-transaction. So it is still cheaper in my eyes to sell to an ESOP than a financial buyer, because if you're selling to a financial buyer, typically there's a broker involved and they will charge their commission on the transaction. So you're incurring those professional fees probably at a similar level plus a broker fees. So at the end of the day, it will be cheaper to sell to an ESOP most likely, and you're getting the tax benefit going forward for the company. So in a private equity deal, you pay all these fees. Well, now you got to fund that debt with after tax cash flows, where here you're doing it with pre-tax cash flows. So while you're spending a little bit up front, you're getting the savings and you're not putting the company in a financial adverse situation.
I would echo all that and add, the only other thing is time. I mean, these things take time. If you're in a rush and if you have some kind of deadline, it can be an issue. I mean, with co-ops, it can be a little quicker and cheaper. I mean, you can get them done for $50K or so, but, or even less sometimes. But, the time to do a good job, we usually like to say 1.5 years, like I said before. I'd be curious, how long does it typically take to do an ESOP deal, if I may?
Yeah, from start to finish, I would say 4 to 6 months, depending on if they've done an ESOP feasibility. From the time that you get the go of the transaction, you can typically get them done in 3 or 4 months. If you're starting with education and an ESOP feasibility, you're probably 6 months out. But yeah, from the day you give the thumbs up and you select all your service providers, 3 to 4 months. That's why starting in September through December, it's a really busy time for ESOP professionals, because they're trying to get all the transactions done by December 31st. So November, December ends up being a little bit of a rat race to get transactions done.
Just to mirror real quick what was already said, I would agree for the Happy Earth Co-op transition, the important place to start was getting our business properly and professionally evaluated. And as Dan mentioned, it wasn't necessarily as high as our owners wanted it to be, but it was a firm figure to move forward on in terms of moving into the next step, which is the feasibility study of the co-op. Ideally with an organization, that has done some kind of transition or worked with co-ops in the past. And those were really the crucial things, the crucial hurdles to getting the ball rolling and getting started on our co-op transition.
So let's stay with co-ops a little bit. We asked a question a little earlier about common misconceptions of ESOPs. How about any common misconceptions of co-ops?
I guess what I hear sometimes is people seem to think that they're not scalable, that there's there's misconceptions about management structures and stuff, that they're confusing. And I guess I would just say they are scalable. I mean, in the US, there's worker co-ops with 2,000 owners. That's the largest one. That would be a Home Care Associates out east. That said, I mean, most of them are smaller than that. We do work with a lot of small and mid-sized businesses. It's a pretty good format for that because it's affordable. And then as far as the rest of the world, I mean, there are worker co-ops with 70,000 owners in Spain, for example, the Mondragon system. So that's probably the biggest one that I run into.
Yeah, and I'd say the two biggest that we had going into our transition are a couple of things that we've covered already, so I'll just reinforce them real quick. The first was the financing and the fact that all of the employee owners who are looking at taking on ownership were not 100% liable for the full cost of the business or anything like that, not even close. So that was one of our misconceptions. And I think another one is that, you know, you have to be a certain kind of business in order to be a co-op. You know, around here in Minneapolis, it's like, oh, we're not a grocery store. We're not an agriculture cooperative. So what, can we even be a co-op? Does it even make sense? And I really think, having gone through the process with Happy Earth Cleaning, it can work for almost any kind of business. And you don't have to be a type of business of which there are already many examples of co-ops. You know, we're the first cleaning service in the state of Minnesota with a cooperative structure, which blows my mind because there's cleaning co-ops, like New York City has a lot of cleaning cooperatives. So it's sometimes is like, I thought it required a little more creativity than people tend to think of co-ops.
And another question for Tom and Benjamin on the co-op front, as you look at kind of the key factors for somebody to do a co-op versus an ESOP, what would you say would be the top 1, 2, or 3?
I mean, if you're comparing the two, say the key factors for co-ops is sort of like I've said already. I mean, they're very suitable for smaller and mid-sized businesses. It's just kind of a simpler structure, more affordable. I mean, a lot of the other elements I think are relatively similar in the sense that you still need a certain amount of like cultural fit for the transition. You know, you need a transition team, a general manager ready to keep on or take over eventually, you know, once the owner decides to transition out fully. And yeah, do you have any others, Tom?
I'll just preface this statement with the fact that I don't know a ton about ESOPs. So my specialty is mostly in co-ops, but I will say, you know, one of the things that was really crucial for us is kind of like Benjamin mentioned, you know, we are a green cleaning service. Becoming an employee-owned co-op is something that really fit with our mission and our vision as a business, especially in terms of creating ongoing opportunity for what would otherwise be entry-level employees to get some business owner experience. And there really are, you know, you have to make budgetary and financial decisions if you're going to become an employee owner of the co-op. You have to learn some business basics. You basically have to go through Business 101. And so the fact that there's like some education built into it, and you know, just ongoing learning and training for all of the employees who are interested in becoming owners, it seemed like a much better cultural fit for us over at Happy Earth, just given our pre-established concerns for community and our workforce and other things like that. Not to say you can't achieve that kind of stuff with an ESOP, but having direct ownership on the part of the employees was actually really important for us and has become an incredible recruitment tool, not only for new customers, but also for new employees.
So Bruce and Dan, on the ESOP side, anything come to mind that selling shareholders wish maybe they would have known before they sold their company to the ESOP?
You know, in our case, we probably were not as aggressive on pricing the business. It worked out fine because the total return on the transaction has been outstanding. You know, and when I say total return, that's the initial transaction value, the seller debt component, because it's subordinated, pays a bigger coupon than we would have been able to achieve in a market environment. We're plan participants, so we were able to step in and get a new retirement plan, and I'll come back to that for Tom's comments. But and the fact that, you know, all four of us are still somewhat or significantly engaged in the business 15 years later, it's almost unheard of for a private transaction to sell to another party and to have that income stream still exist 15 years later, you know, in some form. And so total return, it's been an outstanding outcome. You know, I want to just clarify, you know, the difference between a co-op, and again, I'm just learning about worker co-ops today, so it's been interesting for me. But in an ESOP transaction, we're a qualified retirement plan. So we look like a 401k or a profit sharing plan. The only difference is the only asset of the plan is the company. And like a profit sharing plan, we're not asking employees to contribute to this. There's been zero employee cost for this, other than maybe a redirect to a different plan like a 401k match. We still do that, but you know, if we didn't have this plan, we would have probably had some larger contribution to some other form. But essentially, there's been no cost to our employee plan participants for this. It's a qualified retirement plan, so all employees have it, regardless of whether they want it or they want a lot more of it. They all get treated equally. So it's a very it's different, because the worker co-op, as I've heard it today, is it's optional. Some can do it, some don't have to do it. In our case, we don't have those luxuries. Everyone's treated exactly equal after a waiting period of, you know, say a year of new hire and a vesting period. And so little different tool. That's why some of the tax treatments are different, because in a traditional S corporation, the K1 goes to the taxpayer. In this case, it's a retirement plan, and you don't pay income tax on your 401k growth. So that's sort of the deltas here. I don't know if I've addressed your question or got too far off tangent there, but it's just different.
So I'll just add a couple things to Bruce. So in an ESOP, the company will make a contribution to the ESOP plan. That contribution is usually allocated on that person's percentage of salary to the total population of eligible salaries. And there's limits, just like you have in the 401k plan. So it's non-discriminatory, but your larger earners will participate at a higher level within the ESOP than your lower earners. It's 100% company paid benefit, but the CEO will have a larger account balance than the typical line employee, because contributions are allocated based on percent of salary, capped at certain limits at a relatively fair dollar amount. So I think that's the thing to keep in mind. The other thing is, like a 401k, when a participant gets paid out of the ESOP, they have the option to take the cash or roll it over to another qualified IRA. What I really like about ESOPs is I think this is closing part of the economic retirement gap that exists in our country, because you're providing a retirement plan. So it kind of, in a way, replaces the defined benefit plans of years ago, where the company is paying 100% of the benefit. And then in addition, as you get closer to retirement, there's ways for employees to diversify so they don't have all their eggs in one basket. So they can starting typically at age 55. They can start diversifying some of their investments. So when they get to age 60, 61, 62, not all their investment is sitting in one employer stock. At the end of the day, it still comes to sound company because, as Bruce said, usually the only investment is company stock. There may be other cash investments or other investments for other reasons, but the primary asset of the plan is the company stock. So that's the only thing I would add there.
Okay. A couple of audience questions steered towards you, Dan, real quick. One pre-ESOP transaction, one post. On the pre-side, assuming the company has some notes and warrants, is it possible for the ESOP to assume that existing debt and let's see, if there's non-recourse debt like HUD, will the HUD need to improve the new entity? So that's one kind of pre-transaction. Post-transaction, what does it look like for an ESOP company to make acquisitions, and who makes those decisions to go forward with that?
Yeah, so in an ESOP, in the transaction value, what you'll start is with the enterprise value, which is really the discounted cash flow model. There's other methods, but that's the primary one that will determine the enterprise value. And then you back off existing debt to get down to the equity value, and the transaction is done at an equity level. To the HUD comment, I think you need to look at what the change of control provisions are in the debt agreement to see if HUD would approve. If we're talking about an entity that's heavy in real estate, one thing to consider is, do you have enough employees within the ESOP, in the company to make the ESOP worthwhile? But you have to really look at that HUD document for the change of control. On the M&A side, we are seeing a lot of mature ESOPs doing acquisitions. One reason is they are flush with cash from the tax savings, but also to continue to invest in an overall return to their participants. So you could let that cash just build in a savings account earning 1%, or go find complementary or diversification businesses or similar businesses to really get a higher return to the participants. Who makes those decisions? So I think that the management team will source opportunities. The board will approve. If it's a large enough acquisition, so let's say it's 20 to 30% or higher of the enterprise value, sometimes trustees would like to see what's called a fairness opinion on the acquisition to make sure that it's putting the participants in the best place possible, so that it's accretive to the participants. So I use that 20 to 30%. I mean, every trustee is different, but most deals get done without trustee approval, just with board approval. But if it's a larger acquisition or a merger of likes, then that really comes to trustee approval to make sure it's accretive. And that's really what they're looking for.
Okay, question for all four of you, and I'm going to blend a couple of things here, one from Neil and one from Michelle. How many ESOPs and co-ops are there either in the country or the state? And maybe you don't have that answer, but the follow-on would be, sounds like a great strategy on both sides. Why don't more business owners go down that path?
So there's about, and Sue would probably have a better idea, but I think there's about 300 ESOPs in Minnesota today. On a national level, I'll say privately held ESOPs, there's probably 3,000 or 4,000, ballpark. The reason why you don't see more ESOPs is the professional service advisors are really the ones right now who are pushing this model. And so in Minnesota, you have a concentration of ESOPs because you have a lot of professional service providers in this market. I think that's really the whole point of Sue's organization, is to really expand the employee ownership from a grassroots efforts to do more of these type of seminars. But historically, it's been the service providers who've really been pushing the model. And then if you're working with a service provider who doesn't deal with ESOPs, they get stuck in the misconceptions, and they'll tell companies, hey, an ESOP isn't right for you, when they're probably a really good candidate. So getting in front of service providers who understand ESOPs, as well as with what is going on with the grassroots efforts, I think is really starting to promote ESOPs.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just kind of weigh in on that, you know, and you stated it really well, Dan, but it's one of the reasons why the Minnesota Center was created, that there are organizations for ESOPs, you know, the ESOP Association, and there's one, you know, the NCEO, and they're membership-driven organizations, and the center is not. We're not a membership organization. We're a nonprofit, and we wanted to find that middle road that talks about just employee ownership as an option. And so by doing this and getting the word out, we hope to promote that, and having great professionals behind that really helps us drive that message. And then great company stories like Tom and Bruce too. So.
Okay. Tom, Benjamin, any comments as to why you don't think there's more co-ops out there?
I mean, in a similar way, the worker cooperative model was kind of a niche and unique choice that people had to kind of discover on their own. And it is ramping up now. There's a lot more interest, and there's regional developers that can help provide the technical expertise to get these done. And so it is on a growth curve since I think around 2017. It's been picking up pretty quick.
And I can say from our perspective at Happy Earth, you know, part of it was just a lack of awareness about the co-op structure and all the different ways that it can be applied. Even, you know, I started my own publishing company, and when I was looking at the correct, you know, structure for that to build a community around it, a lot of the research that I did, not only on the internet but elsewhere, talked about LLCs and S Corps and B Corps and partnerships and all these different things, but not co-ops, even though they're of a similar type of classification of business structure. So there's some just cultural awareness, I think, that we need to address kind of as a country, and then to mirror what Ben has been saying. And I think as a part of a movement, you know, I would maybe call it like a local movement to find companies that are based more locally, treat their employees with respect. That's becoming more and more important to a lot more consumers. And I think the increase in that trend has also led to an increase in co-ops. And I hope to see more and more of them as we continue to spread the word more.
Okay, we got a handful of minutes left. I got a couple more questions that we came up with prior to the event, and I'm going to try to get to a couple more audience questions. For all four of you, any trends regarding employee recruiting, morale, or retention as it relates to ESOPs and co-ops?
I think that's the number one success part of ESOPs is it's the recruiting, the retention. You know, it probably takes 3 or 4 years post ESOP transaction to get people excited. But if you look at the mature ESOPs and the balances that they're paying out, employees get really excited that you're giving a pretty nice retirement benefit to them, 100% company paid. So I think it's huge. You see most ESOP companies putting 100% employee owned on their marketing material, on the side of their trucks, in their facilities, all over the place. So I think the recruiting, the retention, being an ESOP puts you up a leg up, and it gives the employee a little bit of comfort that it's not going to be sold to a private equity. Now, I will tell you there are ESOPs that are sold for different reasons, but for the most part, it gives the employee security that the company will and the legacy will be there.
Now, in our case, to echo Dan's point, it takes about 4 or 5 years to start seeing the plan balance start to really take off. And for people that aren't, that are new to ESOP, new to employee ownership, we're reiterating the message. The same stories getting told over and over again. multiple times during the year, particularly at an annual meeting where we announce share price, we hand out statements. By the fifth year, the excitement is just palpable in the room. And as a result, our recruiting strategy, because again, our assets drive home at night, and the people we're competing with, other brokers, they're having to compensate and recruit. And what we're emphasizing to the bright young talent is the value build in an environment like ours just can't be matched. It's just not possible to compete with us. And we're not funding outside shareholders. We have, everything in our ecosystem stays inside this environment. And if there's a disagreement or a competitive imbalance on market for a particular salaried position, we talk about it as, hey, if we're off a little bit here, we make it up over here on the valuation. We obviously want to price to market rate for our jobs, but in an inflationary environment, sometimes we're off a little bit, and so this gives us that second chance to negotiate. The good people that we want to retain, they're coming back to us and explaining their concerns much more robustly than if it were, if they weren't stakeholders at the equity level. So it's really powerful.
And I can tell, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say that the statistics that we're seeing in the cooperative space nationally do indicate that it improves retention. And I guess one subtle difference between what Dan and Bruce were saying is with the co-op model, the profit sharing pretty much starts immediately upon a person buying a share of common stock in the co-op. Of course, presuming that there are profits. But it's not cashed out immediately, but you start to gather it, and it's usually, I think actually legally you have to cash out 20% if you can per year, after your first full fiscal year. So yeah, and as far as getting people on board, yeah, I mean, for sure, the benefits, I think, both from profit sharing, but also just a healthy workplace environment, are definitely selling points to get people interested.
Yeah, I can say as the sales manager over here at Happy Earth, so far this year, I would say it's a little early to tell, but the fact that we are now an employee-owned cooperative has become our single biggest selling point. And I would say over half of all of the new customers I've brought on this year choose to purchase our services, and they usually say something like, I have to work with you no matter how much it costs because you are an employee-owned co-op. And so I kind of expected that just based on the market we're already targeting, but it's been overwhelming the amount of customers who, like, even in their initial request forms, they're like, how did you hear about us? And they're like, you're a co-op, and that's cool. So it's really been a tremendous response in terms of selling and becoming a pretty popular cleaning service. And then in terms of, as Benjamin said, for retention, probably our biggest single problem over our 10 years of existence as a cleaning company has been hiring and retaining high quality candidates. And that has gotten a lot better and a lot easier since the co-op also. People knowing that they have the opportunity to become a part owner of the place where they're becoming employed really makes a difference.
Yeah, we got a comment here from Roger. Owning a piece of the rock makes a difference.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're up on our time. Two things. Number one, we will send around an email with contact information, a link to this video, a link to the prior video that I did, All Things ESOPs with Dan, and then also give you an opportunity to connect up with our speakers today. to our speakers, A, thanks for participating, and B, want to leave one last opportunity for you to share with our audience if there was kind of one key takeaway that either we've covered and you want to reiterate, or something new you want to put on the table for everybody. What would the one thing you want everybody to remember about our session today?
Well, I'll jump in here. At least it relates to this ESOP structure. It's a retirement plan. I think about Dan's comment about it's definitely addressing income inequity and more importantly, net worth inequity. We're a tragically fragile society from a net worth perspective. And this is a game changer opportunity to make a difference in your employees' lives. And it's something like 2 or 3 times the value of a traditional 401k plan that ESOP retirees take out. So it's an opportunity to really make a difference in people's lives.
I'll add, I think it's just a great alternative exit strategy to private equity strategic buyer. There's nothing wrong with those, they work, but I think it's just another option for sellers to consider, and really creates a legacy and continuity for their company and their employees.
Yeah, I would just say, share what you've learned today, because there's plenty of people who are curious and don't know about this stuff. So definitely share the good word.
Yeah, and to sort of jump off of what Bruce mentioned, if there's anything we've learned this year, it's that our society really is fragile in a lot of ways. Whether you're looking at the pandemic or the civil unrest that's coming to light, there's no shortage of problems that we're facing as a society. And there's maybe a lack of quality solutions to the types of inequality we see across all kinds of sectors. And I see ESOPs and co-ops as a very practical, in the weeds, mechanical solution to reversing some economic inequality that we really all should be addressing, especially as business owners. And so I see it as vitally and crucially important that we start establishing and transitioning as many co-ops and ESOPs as possible, purely as a way to combat the inequity that we need to start fighting across all sectors of our society.
Okay. And Sue, any final words from you about your organization, what we saw and heard today, and anything else that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, I just want to thank the panel. They did a great job in sharing their story. There's so much more to share. So hopefully they'll have an opportunity when people connect with them, or we'll have another opportunity to share it somewhere else. It is an equalizer. It does create wealth. It's the answer for America, really. And just to put in another plug, we are working on a presentation on employee ownership trust, which is another form of employee ownership. That we hopefully will be teaming up with Club E to present that in the near future. So that is our goal, is just to educate professionals and business owners on the options they have in the employee ownership model. So thank you for having us.
Yep. And as Sue mentioned, look for other partnership opportunities between our two groups. I want to thank the Minnesota Center for Employee Ownership and Sue Crockett for putting this together. Again, we will be submitting an email out to everybody with contact info and video. You can find more information on Club E at clube.com, as well as the YouTube channel, Club E. This video should be up there shortly. And thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to interacting again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Everyone.